Now, Marvel has managed to get back the rights to almost all of its major characters, like collecting the Infinity Stones one by one. But Spider-Man, that's the one character they still haven't fully brought home, because his rights situation is an absolute mess. Think about it for a second. If Spider-Man belongs to Sony, why does he show up in Marvel movies? Back in the early 2000s, Sony had an incredible amount of control over Spider-Man. And honestly, even today, Sony still has a very strong grip on the character. And it's not just Spider-Man's movie rights that came with the deal. They also included a bunch of major characters connected to him, like Venom. It's often said that there are over 900 Marvel characters tied to Spider-Man in one way or another, and that's exactly why the chances of Sony ever selling those rights are basically zero. Because let's be honest, what else do they really have? This?
I have nothing left except Spider-Man.
So today, we're breaking down the insanely complicated Spider-Man rights situation and whether Marvel could ever reclaim full control of its own biggest superhero. So, let's get into it. Back in 1985, Marvel Comics was dealing with serious financial problems. To stay afloat, they started selling off the rights to many of their characters. Spider-Man was one of them. His film rights were sold to Canon Films, but there was one important condition in the contract. Canon had to make a Spider-Man movie before 1990, otherwise the rights would automatically revert back. In 1989, Canon Films was acquired by a French company. Around that same time, Canon's former president, Menahem Golan, claimed the Spider-Man rights for himself. Then he transferred those rights to his new company, 21st Century Film Corporation, and somehow, the rights were extended until 1994. Now 21st Century Film started waving those Spider-Man rights around to attract investors and collect money from Sony Pictures and several other companies. Then in the early 90s, the man who would later sink the Titanic on screen, James Cameron, wanted to make a Spider-Man movie. At the time, Cameron was under contract with Carolco Pictures, so instead of buying the rights himself, he convinced Carolco to do it. In 1991, Carolco Pictures officially acquired the Spider-Man filmmaking license rights. But there was one huge problem. 21st Century Films still insisted that its Spider-Man rights remained valid until 1994. And just like that, the legal nightmare began. In 1992, 21st Century Films sued both Carolco Pictures and Marvel, claiming that Marvel had violated the original agreement and that Carolco didn't legally own the rights. At the same time, MGM entered the fight. Their argument was completely different. MGM had acquired Canon Entertainment's film library and many of its assets. Since the original Spider-Man deal had been signed with Canon Films, MGM argued that the Spider-Man rights now belonged to them. Meanwhile, Carolco insisted that it had legally purchased the rights from 21st Century Film. So now, three different companies were making competing claims over the same character, and Marvel couldn't even reclaim the rights to its own biggest character, because financially, it simply wasn't in a position to compete. Then things took another turn. Carolco Pictures ran into serious financial trouble. In 1995, the studio filed for bankruptcy, and Fox convinced James Cameron to forget Spider-Man and focus on Titanic instead. After years of lawsuits, the different parties finally started reaching settlements. Those settlements sorted out which legal claims actually held up and which ones didn't. With the legal mess finally clearing up, Marvel was once again in a position to license Spider-Man's film rights. And that's when our main villain enters the story. In 1999, Sony pulled off two separate deals. The first was with Marvel. That's the deal where Sony secured the exclusive live-action film rights to Spider-Man. But that alone wasn't enough. The second deal was with MGM. Because MGM was still asserting certain legal claims tied to Spider-Man's rights, so Sony reached a settlement with MGM. As part of that agreement, MGM gave up its legal claims to Spider-Man. In return, Sony granted MGM valuable business concessions, including certain distribution rights related to the James Bond franchise. And Sony Pictures officially secured the Spider-Man film rights. But that didn't mean Sony could do absolutely anything it wanted with Spider-Man. Marvel built several restrictions directly into the licensing agreement. For example, Peter Parker couldn't be portrayed as gay. He had to remain a heterosexual white male. He had to live in Queens. And the character couldn't be associated with torture, illegal drugs, or inappropriate behavior. Now, you might be wondering, if Sony owns Spider-Man, why can't they just change the character however they want? Simple. Sony only owns the film license. The actual character rights have always stayed with Marvel. The moment Sony locked down the rights, they wasted absolutely no time getting Spider-Man projects into production. Their biggest move was teaming up with director Sam Raimi, and that's how the iconic Spider-Man trilogy began. The first two movies were massive box office successes, but Spider-Man 3 disappointed both critics and audiences. After Spider-Man 3, Sony was running out of time. If they wanted to keep the rights, they needed another Spider-Man movie fast. The result? A full reboot. Andrew Garfield became the Amazing Spider-Man. The storytelling was decent, but Andrew's performance, the emotional moments, and the director's visual style won over a lot of fans. The blend of CGI and practical effects also looked fantastic, and this movie ended up making a decent amount of money too. By then, Marvel's fortunes fans were finally starting to change. In 2008, Iron Man changed everything, and with The Incredible Hulk, Marvel Studios had officially laid the foundation for what would become the MCU. Seeing that massive potential, Disney acquired Marvel in 2009, and from that point on, the Marvel Cinematic Universe truly began to take shape. Over the next few years, Marvel grew into one of the biggest entertainment franchises on the planet. But there was still one thing they couldn't get back: Spider-Man's live-action movie rights. Those were still in Sony's hands, because Sony wasn't giving that up. Then, in 2015, Sony Pictures and Marvel Studios signed a brand new agreement. Under that deal, Marvel Studios was officially allowed to use Spider-Man inside the MCU, and Sony agreed to it for one simple reason. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 from 2014 failed to meet expectations. It ended up being a major disappointment. Sony knew that if anyone could truly revive Spider-Man, it was Marvel. After the agreement, Marvel Studios creatively rebooted Spider-Man once again, and officially made him part of the MCU. Then, in 2016, we finally saw him swing into Captain America: Civil War.
Well, I could have stuck the landing a little better. It's just a new suit. Wait, it's nothing, Mr. Stark. It's perfect.
But what exactly did Sony get out of this deal? The answer? The box office. After Civil War, Marvel produced blockbuster movies like Spider-Man: Homecoming, Far From Home, and No Way Home. But the theatrical box office from those films went to Sony, which earned the company billions of dollars. So then, what did Marvel get? Marvel got its biggest and most popular superhero back, and the hype around Spider-Man helped generate excitement for the rest of the MCU. Now, if I had to explain this incredibly confusing rights situation in the simplest way possible, here's how it works. Spider-Man's rights aren't owned by just one company. That's why people get confused all the time. Let's start with the movies. Sony owns the rights to produce Spider-Man's live-action movies, as well as major animated feature films. But because of the special agreement between Sony and Marvel, Spider-Man is also allowed to appear inside MCU movies. Now let's talk about animation. This is where things get a little weird. If an animated Spider-Man project is longer than 44 minutes, Sony owns those rights. But if it's under 44 minutes, like TV shows or streaming series, Disney can make it. Now, merchandise, action figures, toys, t-shirts, backpacks, posters, basically anything that uses Spider-Man's name or image as merchandise, Disney owns those rights. Sony actually used to own them too, but in 2011, Sony sold the merchandising rights back to Disney. And even today, a lot of people consider that one of Sony's most surprising business decisions, because merchandise can sometimes make even more money than the movies themselves. Now let's talk comics. Sony never owned Spider-Man's comic book or novel rights. Those have always belonged to Marvel. And what about video games? The game rights also belong to Marvel. Marvel licenses those rights to different game studios. That's why Spider-Man became a PlayStation exclusive in some games. So in simple terms, Tom Holland's Spider-Man is part of the MCU, but technically, the movie version is still Sony's property. And here's the crazy part. Disney has enough money to buy entire studios like Fox, yet it still can't buy back one single character, because Sony is never letting Spider-Man go. He's their biggest money-making franchise, and from Disney's perspective, they don't really need to buy him anyway. Spider-Man is already part of the MCU, without Disney having to spend billions acquiring the film rights. Right now, it makes it for merchandise. Even after all of that, could Spider-Man ever become a fully Marvel-owned MCU character again? At least for now, probably not. After Sony's live-action Venom universe struggled, the company will likely double down on its Spider-Verse films instead. That's where they've seen the most consistent success. And a franchise that keeps printing money like Spider-Man, Sony isn't giving that up anytime soon. So that's it for this video. And if you want to find out how 1 pound completely changed iShowSpeed's life, check out this video right here. I'll see you over there. Until then, take care.